everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Interlink podcast, an initiative under the Center for New Economic Studies at OP Jindal Global University. Interlinked aims to hold nuanced conversations on the interdisciplinary nature of problems plaguing the world today. As we hold conversations on the socio-political climate, we want to break down these intellectual barriers and look at topics in a way that allows us to question them from several facets. If you're listening to us for the first time, please do have a look at our previous works as well. Today's episode is part of a mini series in collaboration with the History and Culture cluster of Nickel and Dimed. Nickel and Dimed is the official research platform for the Center of New Economic Studies at OP Jindal Global University. It serves as an open academic forum and offers well researched, balanced commentaries on critical economic, political, social, and legal issues across 7 research clusters. We are joined today with Mr. Chandral Ray Chaudhary, also a law student at Jindal Global Law School and a team member of the History and Culture cluster. Chandral, I'll leave the floor open for you to introduce yourself.
Hi Medhya, hello everyone. I'm Chandral Rai Chaudhary. I'm a second year law student at OP Jindal. I'm also first year columnist for Nichols and Dimed. I'm under the History and Culture cluster. I like writing and researching about critical theory and also about the socio-cultural impact of etymologies and so on in our society, especially over the last 300, 400 years.
That's great. I hope you're doing well. Our theme for this series is very interesting actually. We're talking about something you probably do every single day without realizing its power: gossip. Gossip has had a significant role in shaping major historical events throughout the decades. It has ruined kingdoms, started revolutions, saved lives, destroyed reputations. Some call it sinful, dangerous, trivial, and some find it extremely entertaining. It's also been women's greatest weapon and also their biggest vulnerability. But before we dive deep, I'd first like to ask you, Chandral, how would you define gossip? And before you started researching about this topic, what did the word mean to you?
Okay, honestly, I'd like to give everyone a little bit of context here. I went to CBSE when I was in school, and there was a subject called general knowledge in that. And when I was in the fifth grade, they taught us about the concept of panchayats. I wrote an answer in it in which they asked us what happens in panchayats, and I essentially wrote that the elders sit in a circle and they gossip about the events of the week, of the month. And the teacher flagged me for it, and she asked me why I wrote that word. And after a bit of deliberation and everything, she decided it was fine and like she corrected it. And it slipped my mind after that for a long time. But when I started researching this topic, like now I would obviously say that gossip is essentially just informal information. It moves through a community. It becomes considered to be gossip only when like people disapprove of what's being said or they consider it to be informal. It's basically a form of community truth telling, and it gets judged differently based on who's doing it. For example, if it's a bunch of old men who hold all the power in a village, them doing gossip is for the legislative good of the society they live in as a whole. If it's women, it's considered to be old wives' tales and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, I think when I look at history, like I have now realized that gossip has always been a very trusted source of information. Most of our histories that we write about, even now, comes from gossip and word of mouth. The negative meaning comes, it has come and risen much later, and it has something to do with colonialism as well. And we'll get into that later.
All right, that's a very interesting start to this podcast. I remember I was at the side of internet where gossip was deeply looked down upon as a sort of time pass activity that people with ambitions should not indulge in because it strays you away from your motives, your goals. But I think I'd like to explore more about the origins of gossip in itself. So I came across this word called God Sib, which is spelled as GODDSIBB. Can you tell us what it means? Because I think a lot of us have never heard this word before. And walk us through where the word gossip actually comes from.
Okay, I really like that you brought this up because again, whenever I'm writing about something or reading about something, I like researching its etymology first. Now, the word godsib is an old English word, and it's a composite of two words, God and sib. Now, the word God, God, essentially means someone who like is a guardian, not necessarily God as in the God, guardian figure. We get the word Godfather from that, God mother from that. Now, the word sib, while some may be tempted to assume that it means sibling, it essentially just means someone who's part of your family, kin. It can be your mother, it can be your father, it can be someone you trust. Now, it's also important to note that the word godsib in Old English and even Middle English texts, it was used mainly to describe people who assisted in childbirth, and it was a traditionally woman-held role. It's a sacred relationship people had in those times, and the word gossip rose from that. So that tells us a lot about what gossip initially used to be. The word only turned negative when women's private conversations made men uncomfortable. And the reason I'm saying that gossip itself is gendered is because it truly is. Because language has historically shifted to undermine those who are not in power. And as you all understand, I hope, the society that we lived in late medieval and even modern Europe and the world around was patriarchal.
All right. So, you mentioned the role of women and childbirth, right? What was the daily life like for women in medieval times, and what kind of spaces did they occupy?
Um, see, there are multiple contexts for this to explore, but I think universally it was true that in most societies during medieval times, they lived very structured and demanding lifestyles. It was very centered around homes. Like they also had private spaces, but these private spaces were childbirth rooms and community gatherings and so on, where men weren't really present, less because of them not being allowed to, more because it was looked down upon for them to be there. But then also, if women are consistently helping in child rearing and raising the children who will later on be part of society, and they're also gathering and communicating with each other, it threatens the hierarchical power concentration in those lifestyles. So of course there needed to be a way to either delegitimize or keep the women under control in a way. So because these spaces did give women influence, and no matter how loving and kind your husband, your brother, your father, anyone is, they are still at the end of the day a man, especially living in a highly patriarchal society. And it made these centers, these places of women being together, speaking together, communicating together, sharing information together, it looked very suspicious in the eyes of male authority. So yeah.
So, how did knowledge pass down in those times?
Um, Obviously, mostly through oral like means. There was people can obviously see other people doing things and practicing and sharing stories. Um, Everything from childbirth to the practice of midwifery itself in medieval Europe came about from watching other women do it. Uh, the idea that herbs could be used as medicine, and the idea of stories being used as moral lessons. These were passed down from generation to generation through conversations and experience. Though, of course, the written books also helped a lot, but the printing press didn't come about until like the 18th century. So before that, it was mostly just word of mouth, and most people weren't even literate enough in society at those times to read books, much less write them. So it was mostly gossip. And from here, the idea of old wives' tales come about because these old wives' tales were what helped preserve societies in those days. And later on, they were used as an insult to degrade the conversations and ideas that women had. So, yeah.
So, why did people start viewing women's conversations, especially as suspicious or problematic? Because my question is, what was happening in society that made this shift occur in the difference of viewing conversations between women as trivial, problematic, and between men as something that is intellectual, that, brings about some sort of material um, benefit.
Okay, now see, historically, there have always been clashes between newly arising forms of authorities and previously established forms of authorities. Uh, Diverting off topic for a second, if we look at what the church did when it was trying to gain powers, especially with the burning of heretics and the Salem witch trials and so on and so forth, a lot of it wasn't done directly by the church, but all of it was encouraged either directly or indirectly by the church. The reason I'm using the church as an example a lot is because I'm using the Western context right now. And in the Western context, the idea of a woman being in power was simply foreign. Even in the medieval times, when women and housewives and sisters and daughters, they helped societies through their gossips and through their old wives' tales, they held a very traditional and very domesticated role. Now, after religion became a thing, especially Christianity, if you know about Christianity, if anyone ever knows about Christianity, they know that it's a very controversial topic. But women weren't allowed to be part of the clergy for a very long time. Even the nunnery itself isn't really considered clergymen. So the reason for that is because the idea that a woman could ever hold a position of authority over any member in society was considered foreign. An interesting thing to note is that the only woman pope in existence was killed after it was found out she was a woman. Uh, the reason that these conversations were looked at as suspicious is because, again, trying to claim authority over knowledge is something that all newly rising forms of authorities do. But you can't really claim overlordship over spoken word of mouth. Women's unsupervised conversations obviously suddenly started looking dangerous, and they were tried to be like debranded and discredited and delegitimized as old wives' tales when they really were just remedies or practical wisdom, Aesop's fables, so on and so forth. Now, women talking without being seen was seen as a threat, so their conversations were labeled as gossip. And they were called like silly or superstitious. But again, we know how quickly we went from that to trying them as witches.
So, now that we've come to that point in history, what is the relation between gossip and witch trials?
Um, I mean, a lot of it is the same fear. Women sharing knowledge outside of male control. Now, when the church tries to convince people that the only way to recover, the only way to live a good life is the way the church prescribes it, any other way to heal or to grow or to even share moral wisdom that does not conform with the church's vision is seen upon as traitorous in a certain way. Now, herbal cures were thus labeled magic, and women's networks were considered plots and conspiracies, so on and so forth. Gossip circles were used as evidence in witch trials. And of course, a lot of women who were part of these gossip circles as well would often not say that they were just gossiping and so on and so forth. In fact, a lot of times the main witnesses used against women in witch trials were the women they were part of that group with. Uh, so a lot historically, the church has, and again, I'm saying the church because that was the largest authoritarian group at the time, holding overlordship even over kings and monarchies. But really, it was any small village. Again, if we look at any village trials against witchcraft, those weren't explicitly sponsored by the church, but they weren't condemned either. A lot of times they were encouraged. So yeah, the evidence was really just their lack of conformity to the socially acceptable avenues. And what is socially acceptable was dictated by a male dominated clergy.
So the church and colonial powers feared rumors because it empowered the masses and challenged their official narratives, right? But then rumor is just unverified information which spreads from one person to another. I think that essentially means then that authorities were not afraid of lies, they were afraid of people talking to each other without permission, as you also noted with women, right? So, does that mean gossip is inherently anti authoritarian? Is there such a thing where gossip would support a power, or does it always undermine it?
Um, I mean, of course, gossip is a double-edged blade, and while it can harm your opponent, it can harm you as well. Um, it's a very interesting question. I mean, inherently, gossip is supposed to oppose power, right? Because it's an unofficial avenue of conversation. But again, I think the primary reason why authorities and even the church were afraid of gossip and rumors wasn't because of that this was unverified information or that it could threaten. It was the potential of it, I think. Like leaving a potential enemy alive, essentially, in their eyes, would give way to more avenues of opposition. If we look at Martin Luther's 99 Reasons of Why the Church Sucks, that too started as essentially gossip. People were complaining for a long time about how the church was taking money from the rich people to pardon them for their crimes and so on. And everything starts with gossip. Now, you asked me this question that can it also support power, not just oppose it? I mean, I think it's very evident even in modern times in the country we live in that yes, gossip and unverified rumors can and often are used by authorities to bolster their own authority. But again, by giving credit, by not discrediting that unverified information, they also create an avenue for resistance. So, yes, while there are ways in which unverified rumors and gossip can benefit authority. The only way for it to benefit authority is by also letting it have its own space for rebellion. So, yeah, I would say that
So,
gossip is inherently office. Yeah, go on.
so are you saying there's always a victim in gossip, or can you use gossip for good without exploiting someone in the process?
I mean, yeah, I definitely think you can use gossip without exploiting someone. Gossip doesn't necessarily only mean, okay, I think it's important to understand what gossip really is. It's essentially just word of mouth. And it can be word of mouth in terms of verifiable knowledge. The idea that honey can cure cough was essentially gossip, and it's considered a totka in Indian society, but that doesn't change the fact that it is essentially just gossip. There, I don't think is any victim in that scenario. Now, if you're saying that gossip can create victims, of course, that is true. That is a possibility. But gossip can exist without there being a victim. There doesn't need to be a victim for you to discuss ideas or have conversations that aren't necessarily aligning with the status quo.
So, according to the Oxford definition for gossip, it's an informal talk or stories about other people's private lives that may be unkind or untrue. And
So
when
again,
you,
I think, sorry, go on.
yeah, it was just me bringing out the fact that when you are conversing with people with information that isn't verified, that you know might not be true and it's unkind, then how do you say that it's not a necessity that a victim might not be there in a conversation that
I
involves
think
gossip?
I think this is why we need to look into etymology a lot of times before we start looking into things sociologically. Because this is what we were discussing initially, right? Gossip wasn't initially meant to be this. The Oxford definition that you're pointing out right now is how we view gossip today. Definitions change with time, yes, of course. But if we look at the first definition of the word gossip, like we discussed, gossip, it didn't require a victim. Right now, again, when I told everyone the anecdote about my general knowledge exam in class fifth, even then, my purpose for writing the word gossip in a like text about how panchayats function wasn't to say that those village elders were gossiping about people's personal lives. They may or may not. I'm not saying they don't, but I'm saying that the purpose of that word itself isn't just to intrude into other people's personal lives. I'm saying that that definition has been purposefully taught to us in order for it to be weaponized against the people that do gossip. Think about it, really think about it. When we think of the word gossip, who do we think gossips? Like as a verb, which demographic of individuals are more likely to be accused of gossip? Is it men or is it women? So, of course, when you live in a society and you are an academic institution in that society, you are going to write your definitions based on how society views that word. I don't think 500 years ago, Oxford would have written the exact same definition for gossip. And I don't think
But
200 years from now. Go on.
do you think 500 years ago people looked at it in the same way that you're looking at it right now in retrospect? Was there any kind of medieval gossip that was seen as acceptable or like useful, uh, especially with women, or was it all considered bad,
I mean,
unworthy of
yeah,
it?
definitely. Definitely, gossip uh, has been valuable multiple times. This is what I'm trying to say. Because this is what I mean when I say gossip doesn't necessarily need a victim, because it can be used for good as well. Women use gossip to warn, protect, and guide each other because really, men never really shared much information that they gathered outside with their own family members because they were women. It helped the community understand dangers, ethics, and behavior. And honestly, I don't believe that any person would have grown up, even in modern society, without having received their fair share of gossip from their mother, their grandmother, their sister, be they an elder sister or like a cousin sister, whatever. Uh, Everyone gossips, and even the men in today's world do. But when the men do it, it's considered to be imparting experience, and when the women do it, it's still considered to be gossip. At the end of the day, gossip. Uh, I mean, it has been historically considered valuable. It was in medieval times an informal system of accountability, in a sense, in order to help other women live in a world that wasn't really designed for them.
So when I was reading about this, I saw that men too had their own coffee houses where they would gather and talk. What were they talking about, and how is that different from the way women talked?
Um, Again, men in coffee houses were basically doing the same thing. They were sharing rumors, they were debating politics, speculating about events, and so on. Their conversations were treated more seriously and called public opinion, while women's conversations were written off as gossip. Socially, like societally and historically, we have a tendency to underestimate women's conversations because we historically have the impression that they're not going to do anything about it. They're just talking for the sake of talking. But we also don't look into why they don't do anything. Is it because they don't want to, or is it because we as a society don't allow them to? If you look at the French Revolution, there was a women's protest during the French Revolution where a large crowd of women invaded the Palace of Versailles and kidnapped the king at the time and only let him go after he agreed to their demands. So, again, and today with gender studies and how our society is learning to be more accountable as a whole, we do understand that men and women are equal when given equal opportunities. But in those times, even if men were still in other avenues than the status quo, even if they were opposing authority at the time, they were still men. So, of course, their gossips held more legitimacy than women's gossip. Yeah.
So, medieval women, as you said, used gossip to survive in a world that denied them a lot of things. Modern feminism has reclaimed a lot of those things, but we still see gossip as an insult and we still dismiss women's informal knowledge. Does that mean we've made less progress than we think?
I really don't believe so. I think the biggest reason I wouldn't say that we've made less progress than we think is the simple fact that we're having this conversation in the first place. You're asking me this question and we all do collectively recognize the hypocrisy of it. I think the first step to cure is identification and diagnosis. And we have diagnosed the issue. The issue we're facing right now is an equitable distribution of knowledge. Again, the things I write about and I research about usually are about equitable distribution of resources, mainly in terms of knowledge. Uh, and this is why I believe that gossip is a great equalizer in that sense. I wrote this paper called The Politics of Piracy, and it was about how piracy was essentially just another way to resist authoritarian economic barriers to resources. And when I say piracy, I don't mean like the Somali pirates right now. I mean piracy in the sense of piracy of metadata and websites like archive.org, so on. I do believe that gossip itself is a great equalizer in that sense. And the simple fact that even this podcast right now can very easily be considered gossip. We don't consider this to be gossip because we call it a podcast. But if this were a conversation we were having in, let's say, a place where people didn't have internet access, it would be considered gossip by people who went to reputed universities and so on and so forth. The issue we face right now is more of a class issue right now rather than an awareness issue. And I do believe that as time goes on, people hopefully by gossip and other avenues of equitable distribution of knowledge are able to understand and uproot the hypocrisy we live in right now in that sense.
What surprised you the most when you were doing this research? And what's one thing that you probably discovered that you didn't expect at all?
I mean, obviously, uh, it did shock me slightly because, again, I've always been under the impression that gossip isn't really good. Like, when the family that I was raised in, all of my family members went to Christian Catholic schools. So they were all under. I've grew up with very strict morals in the sense of children must be seen, not heard, and don't gossip. It's bad for you, so on and so forth. The idea of gossip is traditionally looked down upon, even in my family, and I consider my family to be a very progressive family in terms of the families I've seen in Indian society. What really shocked me was that I didn't really expect that like gossip would have started out as something positive. I thought that it started out like the word gossip would have been used as a negative from its inception, inherently as a bad insult. um, Again, I can't say I wasn't unaware that language and etymology is often twisted to like silence demographics. I just didn't expect that it would be this successful to like the scale that people would be that unaware of it. And I really didn't understand that gossip could be important for survival of our society as a whole. Like obviously I knew that totkas and jugaad and the traditional passing down of knowledge, uh, so on and so forth. Like hell, even the profession of nursing or even medicine itself rose from gossip. I never really categorized these things as that, and it was very surprising to me. And I honestly don't. I'm very glad that I looked into it because I would rather not live with that misconception for the rest of my life. But yeah, And you asked me something else that surprised me. Uh, j- I just think it's very important to note that the revolt of 1857 in India was also the consequence of gossip. The gossip being that people were under the impression that the cartridges of the bullets that the British sepoys were being supplied with contained cow fat, which is what led to the initial sparks of rebellion amongst people like Mangal Pandey and so on. So yeah, those things.
I'm glad too that I also got to learn about the origins, the inception of the word itself, and how it wasn't something that started out as a negative thing. One last question to you is why does this history matter? Like, why should people today care about how gossip worked in medieval times?
Because I think we still judge certain people's voices more harshly than others. They may not be women, or they may be. I'm not saying that women aren't judged harshly. I'm simply saying that certain demographics of people are still treated unequally in the sense of the legitimacy of their voices. We dismiss women's informal knowledge as gossip still, and understanding where this comes from helps us see how power shapes who like gets to be involved in the conversations regarding power. um Gossip gets an unfair reputation. Like even you pointed out, like, can gossip really never, like, ever not have a victim? It does get a bad reputation. And I think we've understood now that it is rooted in sexism, a large part of it. And gossip itself is neutral. It can hurt, of course, but it is also used to express injustice and protect communities. um it matters to research these things because it also teaches us about how words can be used, like simple definitions of words can be used against like people for such a long time. The entire idea of speaking to a woman about politics is looked down upon even in today's world, even in family conversations, primarily because as a society we still believe that women are only capable of gossiping while not understanding that we too are doing the same thing.
I think that's a great note to end this podcast with. It was a great first episode of the mini series about gossip and its role in major historical events that have happened throughout the decades. I hope everybody who listened till the end had something to take away with them, learn something new, just like me, just like I did. And please join us again for the second episode of this mini series that comes out soon. Have a good night or a morning. Take care.